voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. We'll be building up to the next big announcement on who stays in the race to become our next Prime Minister. Keeping me company today is Tom Slater, editor of online magazine Spiked, and there's loads to discuss as we wait for Sir Graham Brady to read the fate of the final four. Could we be braced for an entirely new-look Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch? Or will the outsider get her marching orders from MPs in an hour? And will change at the top mean a change to our policy on Ukraine? There's been a huge focus on the economy, but is Europe on the brink of an even bigger crisis? And with the news, it would take decades to update our infrastructure to beat the heat. Are we braced for summers of chaos to come? And we will, of course, be bringing you the results from Westminster live at the end of the show, so don't go anywhere, unless, of course, it's to rehydrate. A penny for your thoughts, or your thoughts on Penny, Rishi, Liz and Kemi. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or throw down your Twitter 2-bit at GBNews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's just 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The UK's recorded a temperature of over 40 degrees for the first time ever. The Met Office say a provisional reading of 40.2 has been measured at Heathrow. Red extreme heat warnings continue for millions of people in England, with amber warnings for most of Britain. Last night, temperatures didn't fall below 25 Celsius in places, making it the UK's hottest night on record. National Rail has told people to travel only if absolutely necessary. Many train services across the country have been cancelled.
But we need support from the government. We can't do it ourselves. There's only one body that's got the finances to adapt the buildings where people live, adapt the buildings where people work, adapt the Victorian tubes and the old buses, and that's the government. So we're lobbying the government for more support, because the bad news is these heat waves aren't going to happen every 10, 20, 30 years. They don't happen every 2 or 3 years. 2 years ago, when there was a heat wave, more than 2,600 people lost their lives, excess deaths directly linked with the weather. I worry with our adaptations, you could have future excess deaths going forward.
A major search operation is underway for a missing swimmer in Essex. The Coast Guard have confirmed 3 swimmers were rescued from the water around Clacton Pier. Emergency services are currently trying to find a 4th swimmer. Meanwhile, in Europe, firefighters continue to battle wildfires across the continent. More than 34,000 people have been evacuated from southwestern France. There have been more than 510 heat-related deaths in Spain following a week of soaring temperatures. 2,000 firefighters are fighting the blazes, which started a week ago and have burned over 19,000 hectares. Conservative MPs have voted in the penultimate round to choose the next leader of the party. We should have the result of who the final 3 candidates are in about an hour's time. As of last night, the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak had the largest backing from MPs, while the International Trade Secretary Penny Mordaunt followed closely behind. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is on the ballot. So too is the former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch, who, despite securing the fewest votes of support last night, believes she can still win.
I do feel confident. There's everything to play for. My colleagues are looking at who's going to be winning the next election, and I think I'm that candidate, so let's see what happens. Well, I think I'm getting support from all wings of the party. I'm the unity candidate as well as the change candidate.
Conservative MP Mark Harper told GB News he believes Rishi Sunak can restore trust in the party.
He's being honest with people about the economic challenges facing the country. He's not saying the things that are easy to say, that would be convenient, but he's telling people what they need to hear. And I think our members are very realistic people. They'll listen to his message about the number one priority is defeating inflation. And I think they'll also look at how he polls across the country, and they'll see that in him they've got someone who can lead that battle to try and persuade the public to give us what will be a 5th consecutive term in a couple of years' time.
Tobias Ellwood's been suspended as a Conservative MP after he abstained in yesterday's government vote of confidence. Boris Johnson stripped him of the whip. That means he'll no longer be able to vote alongside fellow MPs in the Conservative leadership election. Mr Ellwood has been supporting Penny Mordaunt. In a statement, he said he was very sorry to lose the whip and said travel disruption meant he wasn't able to return to the UK to vote in person in the confidence vote. Wages are falling at the fastest rate since records began when taking into account rising prices. The latest data from ONS showed paychecks dropped by 3.7% over the 3 months to May when compared against inflation. Meanwhile, the number of UK workers on payrolls has risen by 31,000 to 29.6 million between May and June. Meanwhile, our grocery bills have increased by over £450 in the last year. Retail research firm Kantar says the increase comes after food and drink inflation hit the second highest level on record. Dog food, butter and milk are some of the products that have seen the fastest rise over the last 12 months. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Well, in theory, we are but days away from knowing which final 2 contenders will battle it out over the summer to become our next Prime Minister. But today's ballot of Tory MPs is perhaps the most critical. Why? Because I believe it will decide what sort of party the Conservatives want to be and what sort of country we could be set to become. The party of the future, throwing weight behind the impressive outsider Kemi Badenoch, who has captured the hearts and minds of people across the political divide. Young, straight-talking and inspirational, quite unlike anything British politics has ever seen. A gamble, some might say, or an unprecedented revelation that would show off the United Kingdom to the rest of the world as the land of hope, of meritocracy, of audacity and of progression, the land of the free, a nation of dreams, of new ideas and old values. Or they will file in behind conformity candidates, the tried and the tested, and the largely rejected by the very people they pledge to lead. Today, the Conservative Party will tell us whether it is the party of today to make a United Kingdom of tomorrow. Well, in the studio today with me as my presenter friend is the editor of Spiked, Tom Slater. Tom, it is interesting, isn't it? Kemi Badenoch came out of nowhere. She's rushed up the inside. And when you look at all the polling, new polling out just earlier on from YouGov, showing that against all the other remaining candidates, she wiped the floor when it comes to public opinion.
Yeah, I just don't think that message is going to get through to MPs, unfortunately. I think Kemi Badenoch is by far the only kind of interesting candidate in this particular race. There's a lot of dancing on the head of a pin on a lot of issues, but on certain things that I think really matter, issues like the culture war, issues like trying to find a kind of slightly more straight-talking, interesting voice in order for the Tory party to kind of get through. She's the only one who's even halfway there to being someone actually kind of interesting and transformative. I think what's kicking in is a sort of sense that you've got to be pragmatic, you've got to go with someone who can be a safe pair of hands, the requisite amount of cabinet experience. I'm sure there's a lot of cabinet positions which have been dangled before MPs as well in all of the horse trading. But I just think that's a complete mistake. I think the Tories are in a real mess, and if they want a chance of winning the next election, they need to take a risk on someone who might not have the most cabinet experience, but in my view, even though I'm not a Tory and don't necessarily have a kind of candidate in this race, I think is their best bet of cutting through with people.
I mean, what's interesting is she was a junior minister in the Treasury. Her rhetoric on how to manage the economy is not that far removed from what Rishi Sunak is saying. She's got experience there. As a junior minister, she's had experience in many departments. Actually, I believe she's had more political experience in various ministries while the government's been elected than Conservatives have been elected to government than David Cameron had when he was in shadow cabinet positions before he became leader of the Conservative Party and went on to win an election. So it seems to me that she's future-proofed as well. It would be very difficult, the opposition benches and the sorts of slurs that they want to attack the right wing of politics with, it would be harder to make them stick on someone like Kemi.
I think that's true, but I also think in terms of kind of fighting the culture war, I think it's also just the kind of strength of her ideas and her ability to articulate them which make them so strong. I mean, her speech against critical race theory in 2020, closing a debate in October, I really recommend it. It's a really brilliant blast against this new racial politics. So aside from, as you're saying, you know, even beyond her particular identity, as it were, she's just very good on that particular issue. And in a situation where really the economic debate in the Tory party is between do we cut taxes now or do we cut taxes later, there's not a whole lot going on in that front, regrettably, in my view. That's the thing that sets her out, and I think that's the thing that could cut through with a lot of people who do look on politics and think that it's on another planet because it's so obsessed with all these issues that don't really speak to people's everyday concerns.
Yeah, Tom, lots more to discuss on that front. Thank you so much. Tom Slater there from Spiked. Well, let's talk to Tim Lawton now, who's the Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham. Tim, are you going to be revealing who you're backing for leader?
Not yet, Alex. I mean, I've made it quite clear, having been in 6 leadership challenges now in my time in Parliament, I'm on the losing campaign team 5 times, so I'm the kiss of death. The last thing any of the campaign teams want is me naming who I am to see as the new leader, so I'm just keeping my head on at the moment.
I mean, the tip on everybody's tongue for about a week now has been Kemi Badenoch, who has been a complete refreshing revelation to a lot of people in the media class, but also members of the public. When you look at the latest polling, she is clearly leagues ahead of her contenders. But it seems to me that she's the one most at risk of being booted out of the competition in less than an hour's time.
Well, she came fourth. I mean, she still had momentum last night. She increased her vote by 9, and that was more than Liz Truss. I'd be really impressed with Kemi, not just through this leadership campaign, but when she came into Parliament in 2017, I certainly marked her out somebody to watch. Really confident, polished performer in the chamber. Really prepared to sort of say it as she sees it, straight talking. That's really refreshing. Exceedingly competent, being a good minister, and she's had quite a good campaign. I would love to see her in the final 2. Whether or not she comes out on top, I think she's got a really promising career ahead of her, and I hope whoever does win, if it's not her, gives her a senior position, because she certainly merits it in this leadership campaign. I made that absolutely clear.
I mean, what sort of horse trading is going to be going on behind the scenes right now for these 4 contenders to shore up support from MPs? Will it be the case that some are being offered ministerial positions, junior ministerial positions, in order to say, if you back me, I'm going to give you a bigger job?
Well, nobody's offered me anything, so I can't say for sure. And I think all sort of horse trading gossip and are people lending votes to other campaigns to try and gerrymander the final outcome, I find in practice, having been involved in campaigns, well, that doesn't really happen. There's obviously a lot of scrap around people saying, look, we need your vote, trying to win a few people across from some of the other campaigns on the basis that another candidate is much more likely to make it in the final two. And the race is wide open at the moment. Interesting about this competition. Rishi, I think, is fairly short of being in the final two, not over that magic 120 mark yet, but pretty close to it. Any of the three others could be that second person in the final two. It's not by any means assured that it will be Liz Truss or Penny Mordaunt. You know, Kemi has had that momentum, and she's had good debate huntings as well. So, look, we will know in just under an hour's time who the final three are going to be. But the good thing is, what a diverse and talented group of candidates we've ended up with, and the very diverse and talented group of 8 that we started with.
A very diplomatic of you, Tim Lawton. Thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. The Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham. Well, now, the temperature has exceeded 40 degrees Celsius in the UK for the first time on record, with 40.2 degrees reported at Heathrow at 10 to 1 today. That's according to provisional Met Office figures. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is hosting a 3-day climate summit as his twin role as Mayor of London and chair of the C40 cities. Our reporter Alice Porter caught up with him and talked the weather and the Tory leadership race and the commitment, or lack of it, to net zero targets.
Now, we've got to talk about the fact that this is the hottest day of the year so far. I mean, something that I know you're very concerned about. I mean, a lot of people in London are really, really struggling, but also I think it's raised a lot of concerns about our infrastructure. I mean, we've seen Luton Airport, problems with the runway. I was trying to get the train in yesterday, there were huge delays. I mean, what is City Hall doing to improve the infrastructure for Londoners who are struggling to cope in the heat and can't get about their normal day?
Well, our city wasn't built for temperatures of 40 degrees, right? Our homes weren't built for that, our place of work wasn't built for that, our transport wasn't built for that. So in the short term, we've got to make sure that we adapt our city what's to do with the symptoms of climate change. In the long term, we've got to tackle climate change in the medium term as well, to sort that out, and the short term as well. So in London, the stuff we're building going forward is all future-proof. So the new Elizabeth Line trains, air-conditioned, new buses have an air cooling system. New buildings are required to have air cooling systems, so they're cool in summer, warm in winter. The problem is the older homes, the older places of work, the older public transport. So we're doing what we can with the limited funds we've got to retrofit, to adapt, but we need support from the government. We can't do it ourselves. There's only one body that's got the finances to adapt the buildings where people live, adapt the buildings where people work, adapt the Victorian tubes and the old buses, and that's the government. So we're lobbying the government for more support, because the bad news is these heat waves aren't going to happen every 10, 20, 30 years. They're not happening every 2 or 3 years.
Let's just talk briefly about the Tory leadership contest. And when we've had the candidates last night all give a commitment to net zero, how confident are you that they will stick to it if one of them becomes Prime Minister?
I've got no confidence at all that any of these candidates take the issue of getting zero carbon seriously. They're kicking the can down the road.
Well, I want to know your views on this. Do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or join the conversation on Twitter @gbnews. Well, Tom, what do you think about this? A lot obviously being made of the net zero commitments, given what's going on in the weather right now. But is this really the focus of this campaign? And do you think they should be tethering themselves, I mean, they are enshrined in law now, but to those targets?
I don't think we should have tied ourselves to it in the first place. I mean, first of all, net zero was just kind of nodded through Parliament. There wasn't even a proper vote, and yet the estimates that exist for how much it might cost are in the trillions, and we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and every kind of assessment of how you could possibly get to this target, given the fact that a lot of the green technology we have just isn't there yet, will be making people's lives more expensive and more difficult. And until we solve that, then this is a suicidal proposition. And I think in the current leadership debate, you can understand why they're kind of tethered to it. No one wants to kind of alienate a certain wing of the party or to get a load of bad press. But someone in British politics needs to have the guts to stand up to this particular target. And so far, despite the fact I think Kemi Badenoch has tried to kind of like chart a middle course on this particular issue, the nettle needs to be grasped, I think, because especially now we can't be. it's a luxury we can't, afford anymore. I think.
Yeah, I think someone who made quite an interesting point in this was, in fact, Tom Tugendhat in the last television debate, where he said that the atmosphere doesn't care where the carbon's coming from. And actually, the more we cut back, we're essentially exporting our carbon footprint abroad and self-flagellating at the same time and hamstringing our own industries.
I thought it was good that you raised nuclear as well, because I think in the longer term and the sort of medium term, it's about embracing gas. And I think in the longer term, it's about embracing nuclear, which is plentiful but clean energy. And I think we just need to be clear-eyed about this sort of thing. We shouldn't get into a situation where we're expecting people to put up with less and expecting people to not have a better lifestyle than previous generations. That's not a saleable political position for anyone, and we shouldn't embrace it just because that kind of eco-ideology is so popular among certain people. It's never going to pass muster with the public, particularly when people realise what the reality of it means for them.
Tom, thank you. Yeah, I mean, politicians really are stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment, aren't they? These soaring temperatures today, putting climate change slap bang back in the middle of the political agenda. And yet, at the same time, with what is going on with the war in Ukraine, energy prices rising, that situation about to no doubt get much worse during the autumn. A lot of them have to figure out how they're going to conquer this particular delicate balancing act. Well, just a reminder of that email address to get in touch with us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet the programme @GBNews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, as the UK experiences its hottest day on record, we'll speak to one business having to close its doors early, and I'll be asking an architect how we future-proof our towns and cities to deal with future extreme weather. Time for a short break and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The hot spell peaks today with the likelihood of temperatures never previously recorded in the UK. That's why there are weather warnings in force for extreme heat, because this kind of heat can have serious impacts. Now, there is a change on the way. Cold fronts are going to move in from the west. Already that change taking place towards the far southwest, parts of Northern Ireland as well. Cooler compared to yesterday, but for the vast majority it's sunny. It's breezy, yes, but it's still very hot, with temperatures peaking by the middle of the afternoon up into the high 30s and even 40 or 41 Celsius, somewhere between London into the Midlands and Lincolnshire likely to be the hot spot. Scotland also likely to see its hottest day on record, 35 Celsius in the far southeast of Scotland, but cooler for Northern Ireland, for southwest England, low to mid-20s here. And we're going to see showers move across the whole of the country overnight, perhaps some thunder associated with these downpours as the heat clears away. And then still a warm night to come, but nowhere near as warm as it was last night. So slightly more comfortable. And a bright start for many on Wednesday. It's looking fine in the east, certainly first thing, with some sunshine. A few showers in the west for Wales, the southwest, and some rain perhaps turning up across eastern parts of Scotland. By the afternoon, as temperatures rise once again, we'll see some heavy downpours for central and southeast England. And in the east of England, temperatures will still reach 29 or 30 Celsius, but it's more comfortable elsewhere, I think. Low to mid-20s largely further west. And really we're back to more typical summer weather rather than this extreme heat that we've seen over the last couple of days. And so the outlook looks mostly fine. There'll be some showers around, particularly on Friday. Otherwise, some sunny spells and temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, if you haven't heard already, apparently the UK is hotter than 98.8% of the planet right now. It's pretty radical for a little island under the whims of the mercurial jet stream, dragging in the beast from the east in the winter. Or right now, Saharan plumes bringing desert heat, already having torn across Western Europe, leaving infernos in its wake. Well, if the Azores High moves further north, it will continue to bring unprecedented hot summers to Britain. But the problem is, we're simply not ready for it. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has warned it would take decades to update our infrastructure to withstand temperatures above 35 degrees, while Luton Airport's runway melts and trains creep tentatively along wilting tracks. And neither are our buildings. We don't have porticoed streets providing day-round shade or the white-painted fascias of picturesque Aeolian architecture. No, we have cluttered attics, pile carpets, large shutterless windows guaranteed to laser beam the sun and set your sofa on fire, and air conditioning only, it seems, in office blocks, not the high-density tower blocks thrown up to accommodate our swelling population. So, how do we insulate Britain in winter and heat-proof it in summer? Because tens of millions of sweltering people who, come autumn, won't be able to pay their heating bills really need to know. Joining me on the show now is Gareth Smith, who's the owner of Eden Bakes, which is a local cafe in Edenbridge in Kent. Gareth, you've actually had to close your shop early today. What's going on?
Well, yesterday we took the decision to close. It's a small shop in the high street, and to be fair, my wife works in there more than me, and with the refrigeration, it's hotter than outside. So we took the decision yesterday to close, and that's the top and bottom of it, really.
Right, so Eden does bake, but perhaps not in the way you're hoping that it would. How is this impacting? Yeah, how is this impacting you and other local businesses in the area? Have you ever had to shut down before for a reason like this?
Never, but yes, the day before I saw a few takeaways were closing, and people were sort of jumping on the bandwagon. You're not very nice to your staff if you don't close, and I didn't really agree with that. And I was thinking yesterday, my wife's got to work in there with ovens. The fridges are kicking out loads of heat, and I thought, it's not really fair. I mean, I'm driving around delivering around everywhere else, and it's not too bad. But when you go in there, it's just not fair. You know, we took the decision to close. That was it.
So have you found yourself in this unprecedented day of closure, Googling solutions and figuring out what you're going to do to try and cool down your business and your bakery if this happens again?
We thought of this earlier. It's just too expensive to sort of fit in air conditioning units in such a small space. You know, we're cutting holes in walls, ventilation. We actually we were putting some ventilation in the back room already, and we thought we'd turn it into an opportunity this morning and get the guys in early morning to cut the holes in the wall and fit it all this morning. So we used it as an opportunity.
Gareth, I'm so sorry that people aren't being able to taste your delicious bakery products today, and hopefully you'll be able to get your nose back to the grindstone come tomorrow. That's Gareth, who is from Eden Bakes, a bakery in Kent that has been forced to close because of the heat. Well, joining me now on the show is the programme director of the World Architecture Festival, Paul Finch. Paul, it's a subject that you would imagine we should have been looking at for the past 2 decades, considering how much people have banged on about climate change. But how do we design our towns and cities better so we can cope with heat waves like this?
I think it's a huge question. And of course, the first thing you would do is look at countries and climates which are generally more extreme than ours. I mean, we're not going to have months and months of 40-degree temperatures, but as the Mayor of London said, we may have to get accustomed to more frequent heat waves. Well, how do they cope? How do they run trains in Saudi Arabia? How do they have people walking about in the middle of Dubai or Oman? How do you provide natural shade? What can you exploit from nature? And what can you learn from other cultures? And the answer to that is quite a lot. And I think this has to be seen in the context of how do you mitigate against extreme temperatures for small periods of time during the year? Because it doesn't matter how good we are at doing zero carbon development, and we should be doing that. But of course, unless everyone in the world's doing it, the climate's still going to heat up. So it's not as though if we all behave perfectly as individuals, that will solve the problem. We're still going to have a problem, and therefore we need to look at that collectively. Now, at a sort of local level, sorry.
No, carry on. Do carry on.
Well, I was going to say an obvious example is, traditionally in British houses, they've been designed more to keep heat in rather than keep the heat out. So, for example, we put kind of blinds on the inside of our windows. But if you go to Spain or Italy or France, you find that they put shutters on the outside of the windows, which of course is much more effective in keeping heat out. With our sort of climate, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to invest in air conditioning when the number of times a year we'd really need to use it is fairly limited. The alternative is to try to exploit what the Victorians and Edwardians would do in their houses, which is flows of air. I mean, when we brick up chimneys, we forget that we're actually doing something to the way that the air flows through a building. If we build apartment blocks where they're called single aspect, so there's only one window, we're placing far greater reliance on mechanical systems to provide ventilation rather than opening windows so that you get a breeze running through the apartment or through the house. So those practical things, I think we just need to have a close look at. But I think in the medium to longer term, there are other ways in which we can organise our cities, which will make a big difference. For example, I've been looking at projects from around the world that have entered the World Architecture Festival Awards programme this year, and some of these are really intriguing. You know, I'm looking at, for example, the biggest project in Canada at the moment is the reworking of somewhere called the Downsview Airport, where they're kind of greening the whole thing out. They're putting buildings up which incorporate natural shade. They're using a lot of timber for the structure. Over in China, they're going one step further. They are deliberately removing buildings that get in the way of natural flows of cool air going from sort of lake districts out to the sea. In Singapore, they've been computer modeling how you get flows of air between buildings. And sometimes tall buildings can help to create these airflows. Sometimes it's too much at the base, as we all know, but sometimes it's really useful because cool, moving air will, for example, stop malaria developing in stagnant pools of water. In Doha, the Musharraf project, designed, master planned by British architects, Allies and Morrison, have incorporated a whole series of overhangs, colonnades, walking routes, so that even in very hot conditions, you notice the difference in temperature when you go into shadier spaces. So there are things we can do. We shouldn't give up, but we've got to think about mitigation, I think, as well as the zero carbon story.
A lot there, a lot for us to think about. It's time we pulled our finger out and put some of it in action. Paul, thank you ever so much for coming on, explaining some of those fascinating examples from around the world. I want to know your views. How are you coping in the heat? Why is it that we're not better prepared for extreme weather? I mean, we've been talking about climate change for a long time. Our homes aren't insulated when we can't pay our bills this winter. Shutters outside the windows, that would have been simple, wouldn't it? Also keeps the light out when you're trying to get a good night's kip. Stops that early morning sunshine disturbing you. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews, or tweet us at gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we're going to be talking how there's hope for a grain corridor out of Ukraine as a deal may be made with Russia this week. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The UK has recorded a temperature of over 40 degrees for the first time ever. The Met Office say a provisional reading of 40.2 has been measured at Heathrow. Red extreme warnings continue for millions of people in England, with amber warnings for most of Britain. Last night, temperatures didn't fall below 25 degrees in some places, marking the UK's hottest night on record. A major search operation's underway for a missing swimmer in Essex. The Coast Guard have confirmed 3 swimmers were rescued from the water around Clacton Pier. Emergency services are currently trying to find a 4th. Conservative MPs have finished voting in the penultimate round to choose the next party leader. We should know the results at 3 o'clock. Of course, I'll bring them to you here on GB News. As of last night, the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, had the largest backing from MPs, whilst the International Trade Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, followed closely behind. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is on the ballot, and so too is the former Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch. Last night, she said she believed she can still win. Wages are falling at the fastest rate since records began when taking into account rising prices. The latest data from ONS showed paychecks dropped by 3.7% over the 3 months to May when compared against inflation. Meanwhile, the number of UK workers on payroll has risen by 31,000 to 29.6 million between May and June. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, the focus has been on managing an economy in freefall. The worst is surely yet to come. Candidates squabble over whether to cut taxes rather than how to stop a tsunami about to smash the continent. Germany is panicking as the threat of Russia not switching their gas back on following scheduled maintenance of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline has Europe braced for a major energy shutdown, perhaps by the end of this week, which would have devastating consequences across the continent. A tidal wave of blackouts to come and the rip current of recession in its wake, while the Kremlin builds a new gas umbilical cord across Mongolia to China, feeding their central reserves in exchange for powering Chinese manufacturing. Nobody really seems to be talking about it here, but in a matter of days, Europe could be screwed. While we are embroiled in a badly timed leadership contest, a big question still looms in the air. What next for foreign policy? It's a moment that could prove critical. Meanwhile, a senior Ukrainian government official has told GB News he's confident Ukraine will continue to receive full support from the United Kingdom from whoever replaces Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Deputy Defence Minister Volodymyr Harylov says he's touched by the high levels of support from all political parties and the British people. Major General Havrilov told Home and Security Editor Mark White that Ukraine needs the West to send more advanced weapon systems to help halt Russian advances.
In Ukraine's second city, this is what months of Russian bombardment does. In Kharkiv's largest residential neighbourhood, there's not a building that hasn't been damaged. Although the main battles are now being waged many miles from here in the Donbass and in the south, this war of attrition is being felt far and wide. But thanks to Western-supplied advanced weapon systems, Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister told me his country's armed forces have largely halted Russian advances. And with more high-tech weaponry, they will, he believes, be able to retake lost territory.
Given the creativity of our commanders, together with technologies we receive from the West, I have no doubts we will crush this old-fashioned Russian army with the old Soviet-type style of offensive. And they have no chances in terms of technologies.
The minister told me his country would be forever grateful for the leadership shown by outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Whoever replaces him, the Ukrainians are confident they'll still have unwavering support from the UK's political leadership and, importantly, from the British people.
We feel that energy every day from ordinary people, from political parties and different organizations in society. So I'm very impressed with the reaction of United Kingdom, Great Britain.
At this training camp in northwest England, the first of at least 10,000 Ukrainian recruits are being put through their paces. The UK's former head of Special Forces says the programme is vital in helping replace Ukrainian combat losses. But those losses are, he says, being felt just as keenly by the Russians.
And to sustain those numbers, eventually they will need to mobilise, or perhaps they'll come up with a form of words as they have done for the war. They will need more men. They're fighting along a 500-mile plus front. That's the distance from here north of Edinburgh. It consumes manpower.
The Deputy Defence Minister says the Ukrainian people are in this fight for the long haul and there will be no surrender of Ukrainian territory to Moscow.
Civil society will never accept any kind of deal related to the loss of our territories. There will be no deal with Russia.
The Ukrainian people will be hoping whoever replaces Boris Johnson that they'll be just as unequivocal in their support for the fight against Russian aggression. Mark White, GB News.
Well, joining me now in the studio is GB News Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White. And still with me, of course, is Tom Slater. I mean, I worry that appetite across the continent, if anything happens, a big shift in energy supply from Russia that some people are worried about, could suddenly reduce when it comes to arming Russia. But what about us? I mean, they need these weapons, don't they?
Oh, they absolutely do. And hearing from the Deputy Defence Minister, he is in no doubt that the advanced weapon systems are making a real difference. They're not only allowing them to halt Russian advances, but actually to think seriously about retaking captured land back from the Russians to mount these offensives. And they're talking about systems such as HIMARS, which is a multi-pronged rocket system, sits on the back of a standard military truck, so it's highly mobile, but it uses GPS technology, tracking technology, so it's highly sort of accurate and where it's going, unlike the Soviet-era missile systems, the rocket launchers, the multiple rocket launchers that you see that look very similar, but don't have anywhere near the accuracy of that. That coupled with the likes of the howitzers, the big artillery pieces, which are also very accurate, 155 of those they've got from the US, they've got them from Canada and Australia as well. The British are also supplying missile systems and heavy artillery. All of that is making a difference, but the Ukrainians are very clear they need more of it and much more of it.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, it seems to me the burden is going to increasingly fall on the Anglosphere. There's far more of a public debate in continental Europe about perhaps the sense of them prolonging a war of attrition when Russia are really saber-rattling when it comes to supplying them with gas, and they could be facing extreme energy and economic crises as a result of that. How do we continue to be the vanguard and push for other countries to join us in supplying these weapons that Ukraine vitally needs?
Well, I think that's exactly it. I think that was always a big problem going into this. Once we got out the kind of initial weeks of the war, how do you kind of maintain that level of Western support?
Jack you, everybody. Thank you.
Level of solidarity. And I think a big part of that is just making clear to everyone involved how much is at stake here in terms of the values that the Ukrainians are fighting for, as well as it just being in many nations' self-interest to contain the Russian expansionist threat. But again, in a situation, as you say, and particularly in Europe, where the impact of their over-reliance essentially on Russian fossil fuels now coming to bite, you're going to see more and more countries peel off regrettably as we go forward, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, do you think it'd be difficult for the UK to maintain momentum in this area? Because it almost seems to me that we're going to be facing economic crises, energy crises of our own. There's been huge mettle shown by the United Kingdom so far in being the vanguard in resisting Putin's aggression. But things are going to get extremely difficult, and so far we're not really seeing Ukraine be able to push Russia out.
No, it's a long haul war, this, and I think the UK is in it for the long haul. It's already provided £2.3 billion in military support, 3.8 billion, when you include the economic aid as well as the military aid. So another £1 billion was announced by Boris Johnson at the NATO summit at the end of last month to provide these new high-tech weapon systems. The difficulty, of course, will be in ensuring that countries in Europe are along for the ride as well. And thus far they are. Just today, in fact, the European Union has announced another €500 million in military aid for Ukraine. All in all, that's €2.5 billion that the Europeans are giving in terms of military aid. Well, that's about the same as the UK, of course, as one single country has provided. So they've still got a fair bit to go before they're matching what the likes of the UK and America are doing in their generosity.
Yeah, coins down the back of the sofa in Brussels, quite frankly. Mark, always lovely having you in the studio. Thank you so much. And thank you for your thoughts too, Tom. Now, the family of Archie Battersby continue to fight for him, despite a court ruling that would allow doctors to switch off his life support. As their appeal process comes to a conclusion, GB News has spoken to two parents who went through a similar ordeal as Archie's family. Connie Yates and Chris Gard, the parents of Charlie Gard, who died in 2017. Well, our reporter Rosie Wright has the story.
It's been 5 years since Charlie Gard passed away, just 1 week before his first birthday. His death came after the Royal Court of Justice ruled against extending Charlie's treatment for a rare condition which affected his brain and muscles. GB News spoke to his parents, who've since had a second son, Oliver, who's almost 2.
We're going down to London next week for his 5-year anniversary of his passing. So we always go to his grave and release butterflies. So we'll still be doing the same thing, won't we? But you know, it's coming up 5 years now, but it's not any easier really. You know, you sort of learn to live with it, but you know how time's normally a healer. I think when you lose a child, time doesn't really help that much. But I just feel like he's sort of around us. Do you know what I mean? Sort of with us in a way.
Save Charlie God! Save Charlie God!
The support we had during Charlie's case was phenomenal. You know, if it wasn't for the donations of the general public, we would never have had the even opportunity of going to America. And unfortunately, that was blocked by the hospital and the courts. But you know, we set up the Charlie Gard Foundation after his passing, and you know, we get a lot of support through that. So you know, we always feel very touched that he touched so many lives around the world.
Connie and Chris have just won a landmark victory, determined that other parents won't face the same experience as them.
The main point of Charlie's Law is to stop these cases getting to the point of having to go to court, because it's bad enough when you've got a sick child, and to be then taken to court at the same time to try and fight for your child's life is just unbearable. So anything we can do through Charlie's Law to stop these cases escalating to court is the main aim, really, whether that be mediation or, you know, just making sure that the parents' voices are properly considered and listened to.
It's a much bigger problem than people realise, and it costs the government or the millions of pounds in court cases.
Another family who are currently facing a similar battle to keep their child on life support are the parents of Archie Battersby. Archie's 12. He's been on life support in England since April after doctors declared that he was brain stem dead. The courts have ruled that his life support should now be switched off. His parents are fighting this decision. Well, Charlie Gard's parents empathise.
We've been there, we know how it feels. And all I can say, is our thoughts are with Archie and his family. It's devastating for everyone involved. And there's nothing I can really say that's going to make them feel any better. Losing a child under any circumstances is just dreadful. But our thoughts are with Archie and his family at this time.
MPs will now debate Charlie's Law in Parliament. If it comes to pass, then parents may not have to go to court and can use mediators to work out what's best for their children.
Well, after the break, ahead of the briefing with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, he'll be joining me in the studio as we await the results of the latest ballot in the Tory leadership contest. Don't go anywhere, all of that to come. First, though, it's time for the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The hot spell peaks today with the likelihood of temperatures never previously recorded in the UK. That's why there are weather warnings in force for extreme heat, because this kind of heat can have serious impacts. Now, there is a change on the way. Cold fronts are going to move in from the west. Already that change taking place towards the far southwest, parts of Northern Ireland as well. Cooler compared to yesterday, but for the vast majority it's sunny. It's breezy, yes, but it's still very hot, with temperatures peaking by the middle of the afternoon up into the high 30s and even 40 or 41 Celsius, somewhere between London into the Midlands and Lincolnshire likely to be the hot spot. Scotland also likely to see its hottest day on record, 35 Celsius in the far southeast of Scotland, but cooler for Northern Ireland, for southwest England, low to mid-20s here. And we're going to see showers move across the whole of the country overnight, perhaps some thunder associated with these downpours as the heat clears away. And then still a warm night to come, but nowhere near as warm as it was last night. So slightly more comfortable. And a bright start for many on Wednesday. It's looking fine in the east, certainly first thing, with some sunshine. A few showers in the west for Wales, the southwest, and some rain perhaps turning up across eastern parts of Scotland. By the afternoon, as temperatures rise once again, we'll see some heavy downpours for central and southeast England. And in the east of England, temperatures will still reach 29 or 30 Celsius, but it's more comfortable elsewhere, I think. Low to mid-20s largely further west. And really, we're back to more typical summer weather rather than this extreme heat that we've seen over the last couple of days. And so the outlook looks mostly fine. There'll be some showers around, particularly on Friday. Otherwise, some sunny spells and temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, the countdown to the next elimination from the race to get the keys to number 10 has begun. We'll be crossing live to Westminster for that announcement due at 3 o'clock as Sir Graham Brady tots up ballots cast by Tory MPs as we speak. I am joined now by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and still with me in the studio is Tom Slater from Spiked magazine. Darren, tell us what happens next.
Well, someone's going to get booted out. At the moment, who's that going to be? Probably Kemi Badenoch, when you look at the numbers. Big question, of course, is, as always, when we go through round after round of these leadership ballots, is who is the candidate who's just got knocked out? Where do their MPs go? Now, they don't follow necessarily a uniform pattern, but it is an indication of where they go. So Tom Tugendhat, he's got 31 MPs. Who are they most likely to break for? One would have thought probably more likely to break for Penny Mordaunt and indeed for Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, rather than for Liz Truss or Badenoch. And if that is the case, you would have thought she may well drop out, and that is the Committee Room 14 in the House of Commons, where the 1922 committee, chaired by Sir Graham Brady, will appear momentarily. He's always on time, isn't he? That's the one good thing about Graham Brady.
Military timing.
He's always on time, so I think we can guarantee in 4 minutes' time he will be there. So we'll see how that happens. I mean, is it possible? Is it possible for whatever reason? Lots of Tugendhat supporters really want to see Badenoch stay in, and some of Liz Truss supporters have thought, you know what? I'm not convinced she didn't do very well in the TV debate. I might switch sides to the other candidate on the right, and Liz Truss drops out. Is that possible? It is. Unlikely, I would say, but possible. The other thing is, could Rishi Sunak now get above the magic 120 number? And I call it the magic 120 number because that is the number, essentially, that means he's guaranteed in the final two. Not absolute guaranteed, because people can all switch sides, but almost certainly would view himself as pretty much home and dry.
I mean, the interesting thing here, Tom, is that when you look at the polling, Rishi Sunak's been able to garner the most support from the MPs in Parliament, but put against all of the other contenders left in this race, he loses. He's not that popular out there with the general public at the moment. So would the Conservatives be shooting themselves in the foot? They might be able to get someone that they trust in place to handle the economic situation over the next few months, maybe the next year. But it's not necessarily the golden ticket to win the next election.
I think that's exactly it. I think there is a huge misunderstanding here insofar as Rishi Sunak is seen as a safe pair of hands. Now, you could say that insofar as he's been running the economy for the past 2 years, and given the fact that, given the choppy waters, you might not want a big change at the top team. But in terms of having someone who's a leader, in terms of someone who can inspire people, Rishi Sunak is not that person. He does have the kind of presentation and all the kind of political imagination of a bank manager. Those are his strengths. It's not in terms of actually kind of energising people, because the Tory coalition, which was so successful last time, is also very unstable. There's a lot of people who voted Tory for the first time at the last general election. They're going to need something else, that kind of X factor, I think, something to really appeal to people. I don't think Rishi Sunak's got that.
But the big question is who of those final four words?
No.
I mean, that's the big challenge for the Conservative Party. You know, it's the sense... Could Liz Truss do it? Could Kemi Badenoch do it?
But people seem to have glossed over the fact that Kemi Badenoch did, in fact, serve in the Treasury, didn't she? And her economic position has not been hugely different from that of Rishi Sunak. She's been talking about, same as Rishi Sunak, we're going to give you the honest truth, and right now is not the time to cut taxes. It's about stabilising inflation.
Yeah, there were moments during the TV debate the other night where it was a bit like, I agree with Nick, as in both her and Rishi did seem on the same page, certainly when it comes to, as you said, the economy. Liz Truss was also Chief Secretary of the Treasury for 2 years, and speaking to people who worked in the Treasury, you know, they were quite impressed by her diligence and her knowledge in that. But she's very much marked herself out as a very, very big, distinct policy change from the current government. She has marked herself out as someone who wants to see taxes cut, and now. And you know what? Frankly, there is a swathe of the Conservative Party, irrespective of the character of Liz Truss, who want to see that, who disliked Rishi Sunak's management of the economy, and also by consent, also Boris Johnson's running of the economy. We know this. The last 6 months, Conservatives have been crying out for tax cuts. She is offering it, and it's probably the reason why she will remain in the race today.
I mean, what's interesting as well, Tom, is the fact that the general public have been almost given this false choice, haven't they? These are 6 candidates, 5 candidates, 4 candidates to be your next Prime Minister, almost like a US presidential contest, and yet 0.29% of the population actually get to vote, and that will be when it's whittled down to a final 4 by the Conservative Party themselves. And we've all been given this, new star in the making of Kemi Badenoch, and it seems to me that choice may be stripped away from people. Will people forget that? Will they forgive the Conservative Party come the next election of denying them that voice?
Well, I think that's always the nature of this process, unfortunately. It is our system, and it is the Tory party system, whereby you have a very few amount of people, a very small number of MPs selecting 2 candidates to then go to a relatively small party selectorate. Meanwhile, the public are just kind of passive onlookers. And I think it's actually because of how anti-democratic or undemocratically, say, that system is, that you can often see the Tory party making big mistakes, picking someone who might, again, give them a warm feeling because they like a Thatcher tribute act in the form of Liz Truss, or they want to hear that kind of message on tax cuts, whereas what they miss is a candidate who could actually connect with people across the political spectrum and in those seats which they have won and who they can very easily let go of at the next election. Part of the reason I think people voted for Boris Johnson was that he wasn't a normal Tory. He felt like he could cut through with them. He wasn't wedded to a lot of the kind of Tory economic ideology. And even though that's something that upset a lot of people in its party, it's also the thing that made him a viable proposition.
Almost like a Swiss cuckoo clock there. He is almost bang on time. So, Graham Brady, let's go live now to Westminster to hear those results.
I will read the name of the candidate in alphabetical order with the number of votes cast for that candidate, and then specify the candidate to be eliminated from the election. Badenoch, 59 votes. Mordaunt, 92 votes. Sunak, 118 votes. Truss, 86 votes. There was one spoiled ballot paper. We had a full turn, we had one vote not cast. So Kemi Badenoch is eliminated from the election. The remaining 3 candidates will proceed to a final ballot of the Parliamentary Party tomorrow. This will take place, I mean it this time, will take place between 1 and 3, with the result declared at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Thank you. Good.
In the Conservative leadership race, Kemi Badenoch is out of the race, getting only 59 MPs. So she will not go forwards to the next round, where there will be a battle between three candidates in this Conservative leadership race. Liz Truss got 86 votes. She's currently in third place. Narrowed that gap with Penny Mordaunt, who is on 92, and Rishi Sunak just shy of that magic number of 120. He got 118 MPs to back him. We'll have full live continuous coverage of the latest from Parliament as the Parliamentary Conservative Party move to the end game of selecting who they want to see in the final two of this Conservative leadership contests. A very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. This is The Briefing with me, Deborah McCaffrey, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. And what an afternoon it is. We are now down to the final three. The MPs tomorrow will decide between Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss to decide who goes forward into the final two, where the Conservative membership will select who wins on September 5th. Let's go live to Parliament now. Join our political correspondent Tom Harwood, who is in Portcullis House, reading through those numbers. Kemi Badenoch is out, Tom, perhaps not that surprising, but Liz Truss will be pleased that she's closing in on Penny Mordaunt.
Yes, some might be surprised by how well Liz Truss did out of this round. Let's remember the person who went out at the last round was Tom Tugendhat, someone seen to be on the left of the party, someone who wasn't proposing a big economic change in direction, wasn't proposing a lot of tax cuts. Well, unless there's been some skullduggery going on and a lot of churn, as no doubt there is sometimes with what's sometimes referred to the most sophisticated electorate in the world, often referred to as the most duplicitous electorate in the world, that is, of course, Conservative MPs, well, either there's been a considerable degree of churn or quite a few of those Tom Tugendhat backers have actually gone to Liz Truss. She's taken on around 15 extra votes, getting up to 86 there. Now, Penny Mordaunt's also climbed, but only around by 9, up to 92. And Rishi Sunak still not over that 120 threshold that would guarantee a spot in the final two. Now, it's likely he'll make it into the final two, likely he'll find an extra 2 votes there, but it's interesting that we're round 4 of this contest and we still don't have someone who's guaranteed their spot in the final. That has never happened before in the Conservative leadership race as it is currently constructed with this MPs first, members second system that was instituted from 2001 onwards. This is a fascinating race, although today's result might not be the most surprising in terms of who went out. Kemi Badenoch, of course, came 4th yesterday. She's come 4th today, and that means that she's out, and it means that the 3 going through to tomorrow's ballot, which we heard Sir Graham Brady say is taking place between 1 and 3 p.m, with results at 4 p.m. tomorrow, a little bit later because of Prime Minister's questions. We know that the final 3 candidates in this race are Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss.
As always with this, we're now looking forward, aren't we, Tom? And we're looking towards tomorrow's vote. It's going to be pretty close, one would suggest. Where do we think, though, the Badenochs, those MPs, those 59 MPs, may well go to? I suspect probably a big chunk will go to Rishi. That's why he'll get over the line. The big question is, where do they break between Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss?
I think it would be very surprising to see a large number go to Penny Mordaunt. Penny Mordaunt is really going to struggle tomorrow. She's been on the more socially progressive side of the party. She's been painted as more of a liberal-leaning conservative. And especially on economic issues as well as social ones, she's seen as more of perhaps a Cameroon. Now, Kemi Badenoch's supporters are more people on the traditional right of the party, more Thatcherite in how they see the world. And Kemi Badenoch has also been presented as someone who's a bit more of a candidate for people who favour conservative cultural issues. So it'll be hard for Penny Mordaunt potentially to attract many of those. I think the big question is how many of these people split for Liz Truss versus Rishi Sunak, and if enough go to Liz Truss and she manages to leapfrog Penny Mordaunt. It could well be the final that actually, at the start of this contest, before a lot of the parliamentary drama that we've seen over the last week or so, at the start of this contest, a lot of people were saying this was going to be Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss, that this contest was going to be economic continuity versus economic change. And that seems to be the way that the race is shaping out. If I was a betting individual, I would be putting my money on tomorrow's results being between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss.
It is fascinating, though, Tom, just to pick you up on this, and this is why it's so interesting and so unpredictable, is that I get the cultural differences clearly and the wings of the party when it comes to the difference between Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss. But frankly, Kemi Badenoch's campaign on that issue of the economy was much more in line with Rishi Sunak's and Penny Mordaunt's almost than it was with Liz Truss's.
That's certainly true, and there's been a lot of rumour that those around Kemi Badenoch and indeed Kemi herself have been relatively close to Rishi Sunak over the last few days. But, and here's the crucial distinction, those who back a candidate don't always follow the way that that candidate goes. We saw when Suella Braverman was knocked out, Suella Braverman endorsed Liz Truss, but actually Kemi Badenoch picked up more of her supporters. Now, might the reverse happen? For example, were in a hypothetical world Kemi Badenoch to endorse Rishi Sunak, potentially more of her supporters might not go to Rishi Sunak and might go to Liz Truss instead. As we have discussed many times on this channel, the unpredictability of the Conservative electorate can never be underestimated. The fact that these backers of MPs, backers of candidates, don't always follow what those candidates say and might have their own reasons. Potentially a few Kemi Badenoch people might go to Penny Mordaunt because she's seen as quite an eloquent individual, good at the dispatch box. That's a big plus on Penny Mordaunt's side, and that's potentially why a lot of people went for Kemi as well, seen as someone who can perform at the dispatch box, who is relatively eloquent and can put forward a case. So yes, it's not just culture, it's not just economy, it's also so many other issues such as friendships between MPs or indeed how these candidates present themselves on television, in debates or at the dispatch box. So much to weigh up here. It's really anyone's guess, but as I say, I think that if we're following the logic of the last couple of days, this is looking increasingly like a Rishi versus Liz contest.
Tom, as always, great stuff. Keep across it for us. We'll be back with you later on and throughout the afternoon as the reaction to that pours in. Tom Allwood live for us there at Buckhurst House in the belly of the beast of Parliament, reporting live for us this afternoon. Delighted to say, Michael Fabricant, Conservative MP for Lichfield, joins me in the studio. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm just thinking there's a certain irony, isn't there, of Tom being in the House of Commons and me being here.
What do you make of that?
Well, it was an interesting result, wasn't it? I mean, Penny went up by 10 points, but Liz Truss went up by 15. I agree with a lot of what Tom was saying just now. I think there is also an element in the Conservative Parliamentary Party of anybody but Rishi. There will be some people who felt that he didn't give Boris Johnson the support. He wasn't always there on the front bench when perhaps he could have shown support for Boris when there were some very, very tough debates. And, of course, he had prepared his website, as had others in this leadership campaign, some while back. So it'll be interesting to see how those votes will go. Tom is absolutely right when he says, some of it will be personal friendships, some of it will be, depending on whether or not they agree with someone's views. Others will be, on how they actually perform. But one thing we know for sure, there is no such thing as a movement en bloc. The ERG, of which I'm a member,
went all sorts of ways yesterday, didn't they?
That's right, and yet they'd given an instruction, almost, to vote in a particular way.
In saying that, there is a sense that Liz is closing in now on Penny Mordaunt. Would you expect that most Badenoch supporters would row in behind Liz rather than Penny?
Not necessarily. You really can't tell. I mean, Liz has her advantages and disadvantages. I think a lot of people also...
You're backing Penny Mordaunt.
I'm backing Penny Mordaunt, and a lot of people, so I declare my interest. A lot of people feel that Penny Mordaunt has been rather unfairly, singled out for some of these issues, particularly the trans issues. I mean, others will recognise that she was actually the Equalities Minister. So is it surprising that she has a meeting with Stonewall to discuss trans issues? It would have been surprising, perhaps, although I've had meetings with Stonewall to discuss trans issues, and I'm about...
Isn't this the most extraordinary thing? I'm just reading, in the last couple of minutes, the London Fire Brigade are declaring a major incident in London because there's fires burning down people's homes. Sadiq Khan's going to speak to the Commissioner. We've had a record-breaking temperature in the UK today. And yet, you know what? Climate change is hardly featured in this Conservative leadership race. Trans issues have, which affect so few people. Yeah. Frankly, lots of people don't really care about it. Why is that? Why is, on the day in which, we're literally seeing people's homes burned to the ground because of record temperatures, that climate change has not been a bigger issue?
Well, I think it's because people have been picking on the trans issue. It's been, just like I talked about, there's an element in the Conservative Party which says anybody but Rishi. And that's particularly, by the way, so with the membership of the Conservative Party who felt...
Well, we saw those polls today, didn't we?
That's right. And they feel, rightly or wrongly, that he's been duplicitous. Whether that is the case or not, it might be very unfair. But, Penny Mordaunt was the front runner behind Rishi, if that's possible to be a front runner behind anybody. And they've been trying to attack her on any issue at all. And as I said, she's been Equalities Minister, so she would have to deal with issues like trans issues. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Stonewall told me that fewer than 1% of the population would regard themselves as being trans, and they're an important element in our population. But sadly, even fewer people even care about it. Yet, this is an internal little fight going on between the 360 or so members of the Conservative Party at the moment, the Parliamentary Party, and then, of course, it goes out to the 180,000 who will then make their selection.
In saying that, I know you're supporting Penny Mordaunt, and I get your point that there are people out there who feel that Rishi Sunak was disloyal to Boris Johnson, probably one of the reasons in those Conservative membership polls he's not performing as well as he is among MPs, certainly. But couldn't the same be said of Penny Mordaunt? Yes, she didn't resign, but let's be clear about this. She had been organising a campaign to run for leader for many months. She's admitted that herself. But some of her bosses have said that she was nowhere to be seen within departments. Maybe she was so focused on her future leadership bids that she wasn't a very effective minister.
Well, I think that last bit about not being seen in the department...
Well, Anne-Marie Trevelyan said that.
Well, who is Anne-Marie Trevelyan backing? I can tell you she ain't backing Penny Mordaunt. So there have been all these continued attacks focused on Penny Mordaunt. Now, if Tom's prediction is right, and it's Liz Truss, and if all this is coming from the Rishi camp, God help, Liz Truss, because there'll be people saying, well, she wasn't much good as a minister, or she did that, or she did this. Tom again, I keep quoting him, but he's right, we're a duplicitous bunch.
Just very finally, will Penny make the final two? I mean, hand on heart, you reckon that's going to happen? Or do you recognise now it's less likely, it's a bit of a battle?
It's going to be a battle. I'm no good at predicting anything. I said to Penny Mordaunt, I'm a real jinx, because everybody I've backed has been, in my opinion, the best choice over the years, and they've never come through. It all depends on how the Penny Badenoch vote splits. Okay, well, some will go with Rishi, but, there will be a number, I know, who will go for Penny, and I hope she gets through.
I'm not going to ask you for the lottery numbers then. Michael Fabricant, thank you, as always, for joining us in the studio this afternoon. Let's go back over to Parliament, though, speak to Conservative MP Victoria Atkins, who is backing Rishi Sunak and joins down the line. Victoria, good afternoon to you. What did you make of that? Rishi got pretty close, but not over the line.
Actually, I think it's a great result. Look, this is rightly a tough contest. To become the Prime Minister of our great country deserves to ensure that we have the best possible slate of candidates, but also that they're put through their paces. So I'm delighted that Rishi has not only secured the number of votes he had last night, but he's added to it, and I know that he will welcome the forthcoming day or so of hustings and conversations to secure more support for his campaign.
Interesting, though, he did only add on 3 MPs. There was a sense that, you know, particularly with Tom Tugendhat and his politics, that he should have done better. Why do you think that is? Why were, among those, nearly 30-odd, 31 MPs, I think it was, why didn't more of them row in behind the former Chancellor?
Well, far be it from me to claim to know the intricacies of 330 colleagues' voting intentions. It is possible, I put it no more firmly than that some of them may have been thinking about who they would like in that second spot. But for me, my decision was absolutely clear. I wanted to vote for Rishi because I fundamentally believe he will be a great Prime Minister for our country.
In many ways, though, isn't the problem for Rishi Sunak is that he's kind of the continuity candidate at a time in which some of your colleagues, quite a few of your colleagues, and maybe quite a lot of the membership want to see change, in the sense that they do not want to see a Conservative government where tax remains at a really high level, where, you know, we know this. One of the reasons Boris Johnson was unpopular with some of your colleagues was because he agreed with that economic standing, that it was more important in some ways to try and tackle the debt than it was to bring about tax cuts now.
Look, I think the most urgent problem actually facing both our country, but of course the next Prime Minister, are the cost of living pressures that are already being felt by millions across the country, and we fear will get worse as winter looms and as energy prices, if they continue to go up in the way that they have. And this is where Rishi's experience as Chancellor is so vital, I think, because, you know, there isn't a lead-in time for the next Prime Minister. They will be declared on the 5th of September. They will take office on the 6th of September. And the moment they step through that big black door that's so famous the world over, they will be given national security briefings. They will be asked to make decisions about how the economy is handled, how to help with NHS backlogs and so on. And what Rishi has shown as Chancellor, in the short time that he has been Chancellor, he has shown an extraordinary resilience. He has shown an ability to take very tough decisions very quickly. If you think of the furlough scheme, that was worked up in a matter of days, and it helped save 11.6 million jobs. Countless businesses have been saved through the pandemic as well. Many in my own constituency, incredibly grateful for the help that they had received from the government during the pandemic. And it's this sort of, if you like, experience, but also this range of abilities to look after not just the economy, but all the other aspects of life that we care so very much about, that we really, really need the next Prime Minister to be able to do. And I firmly believe, having known Rishi for some time now, that he is best placed to do that.
But in the end, it's not Conservative MPs who are going to decide this. It is, of course, Conservative members, the 160-odd thousand of them. If you look at 97, 2001, 2005, the candidate who topped the poll amongst MPs didn't go on to win among the membership. And we've seen two YouGov polls in the last week in which Rishi Sunak loses to every other candidate he's up against. That has not changed, and he's the most recognisable candidate to Conservative members. Do you recognise that there are a lot of Conservative members out there who, frankly, have seen Rishi Sunak, who know Rishi Sunak, but just don't like him?
So this is the critical difference between the leadership contests you've cited and today, this month's contest, is that those previous contests happened when we were in opposition. And so the people that we were thinking about, that members were considering, would have time to establish themselves, to build up their opposition front benches, to really sort of settle into the role as opposition leader of the opposition. Of course, this is very, very different now. We are not electing just the leader of our party. We are also electing the person who will, as I say, on the 6th of September, walk through that big black door and begin to rule our country. And so we really, really, all of us, I think, have got a very interesting but an incredibly grave responsibility to ensure that the person we put that cross next to is the very best person to do the job out of the slate of candidates. And look, by the way, I think we've had some great candidates. I'm so proud of our party that we have had such a diverse diverse range of candidates of all sorts of experiences and abilities, but we now have to focus our minds on who will be able to do that job from the very moment that they arrive back in Downing Street, having spoken to Her Majesty the Queen. And that, for my money, is Rishi Sunak.
OK, well, we will see, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you lots in the days ahead. Victoria, as always, thank you very much indeed. Victoria Atkins now joins us live from inside Parliament this afternoon. Just to bring you up to date with that news in the last couple of minutes, Sadiq Khan of London's tweeted that the London Fire Brigade has declared a major incident in the capital due to what he calls a huge surge in fires throughout London today. He says that the fire service is under immense pressure. We'll bring you more on that throughout the news bulletins throughout the afternoon. But coming up in just a couple of minutes here on The Briefing, we're going to be talking about the Tory leadership race. Kemi Badenoch is out. We're down to the final three. Who's it going to be? We'll be talking about that and much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, we're going to take a quick break. I'll see you soon.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back to the programme. Kemi Badenoch is out of the Conservative leadership race. Let me just talk you through the numbers in case you went around a little bit earlier. And it's also the difference in the numbers from yesterday that's equally fascinating. So Rishi Sunak is through. He made it through with 118 MPs, just shy of that magic 120. He only gained 3 MPs, though. Penny Mordaunt was up 10. She's on 92. Liz Truss up 15 on 86. Kemi Badenoch was up 1 on 59. By the way, do get in touch, GB Views at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet me at GB News. Let's talked to Charlie Riley, he's former special advisor to Michael Gove, who is in the studio next to me. There are rumours, suggestions, dare I say, conspiracy theories that Rishi Sunak may have lent some votes to Liz Truss this afternoon, hence why she's up a lot and he's not up very much, given the fact you would have thought Tom Tugendhat's MPs would row in behind him, because he'd rather see a battle between him and Liz Truss this summer rather than him and Penny Mordaunt. What do you think of that?
Well, who's to say, Darren? I mean, this is the toughest election to win, I think, in the world, to become the leader of the Tory party. There'll be lots of suggestion about sort of vote sharing or vote sort of splitting, vote gifting. But we'll just have to wait and see. I think Rishi would like to be hitting that 120 number, which secures him, obviously, into the final two. But who's to say? These things happen, or lots of things happen in this kind of leadership election, so we'll just have to wait and see.
What do you think about Kemi Badenoch? She had a pretty good campaign, considering, frankly, not many people had heard of her before all of this. Lots of suggestions that she's almost certainly guaranteed herself a cabinet post, irrespective of what happens.
She's done a fantastic campaign, and I think the reason why people like her and people have warmed to Kemi is just because she's been straight talking about it. She's been very clear about the targets that she wants to set in terms of the economy, targets that she wants to sort of set on net zero, so scrapping some of it in order to help the cost of living. So she's been very direct with the issues that are at stake. And I think it's just a breath of fresh air. And I think she will... I said on this programme, I think, last time, that she is the future of the party. And if you just look at some of the backers that she's had, people like Lee Rowley, people like Julia Lopez, Eddie Hughes, are brilliant ministers already.
Michael Gove.
Well, Michael Gove, of course, it goes without saying, my former boss, my former employer, brilliant man, all backing her. So it's all to play for, but she's done a fantastic campaign, and she's been the embodiment of what it is to be Conservative. She's been talking about how she was flipping burgers in McDonald's, cleaning toilets, to then becoming an MP and a minister in government.
Do we think now, though, it's almost inevitably going to be Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak in the final two?
Who knows? I mean, Kemi...
Is there a path for Penny Mordaunt? I know she's just slightly ahead.
Well, I think if you just take those the numbers of MPs that Kemi now has to, or they now need to redistribute themselves to who they're going to back. It's not impossible for Penny to still make the final two. You would have thought some of Kemi backers will go to Rishi, because I think they have been very aligned on telling the honest truths about the economy and the economic decisions that need to be made in the next couple of years. So I think some of her backers will go to Rishi. Some may go to Penny. But if you are on the right of the party and very pro-Brexit, Liz has presented herself as that Brexit candidate. So I think some of those votes from Kemi will go to Liz and Rishi, and so that's why you probably will see them in the final two.
And just very finally, what do you make of the Conservative membership poll today, YouGov suggesting that, irrespective of whoever Rishi Sunak's up against, he will lose?
Well, going all the way back to 2015, the 2015 general election, when the polls were against the Tory party, in 2016, the polls suggested that it was going to be Remain. In 2017...
we shouldn't trust the polls, is that what you're saying?
Polls have a very, very important part to play in these elections, no less because of the drama that they provide. But I think we can just sort of take them with a pinch of salt, and we will see what...
Well, as they always say, polls are a snapshot of time, and there is another 6-week campaign to come after all of this. Charlie, as always, thank you very much indeed. Charlie Riley, thank you. Live in the studio. Let's go to Westminster now to speak to Justin Tomlinson. He's a Conservative MP and has been backing Kemi Badenoch, who is now out of the race. Your reaction to that, Justin?
Well, it's mixed. Look, I'm genuinely disappointed. Kemi was a fantastic candidate from a standing start. People didn't think she'd get her nomination signed. She didn't think she'd survive those early rounds. And each round we went up, and the momentum was very much with us. A huge amount of excitement and intrigue amongst colleagues. And frankly, she was a breath of fresh air that added that extra layer of intrigue to this contest. And I'm just disappointed, genuinely disappointed, that we couldn't get her over the line today. We had a lot of conversations, but we couldn't just quite do it. But to come forth from that standing start with it's something that all of us can be very proud of.
There is little doubt about that, I think. But why was that task difficult, though? What did you come up against? Why were some MPs, splitting, let's say, for Liz Truss rather than for Kemi?
I think at the end of the day, there was a... We had to gain 13. That's a big ask. Not many people were moving their votes around, and I think people were starting to focus on who they presumed would be either second or third, and then casting their preference, whether that be for Penny or whether that be for Liz. But look, there was a huge amount of goodwill to Kemi throughout. We had lots of colleagues wanting to speak to her, and I think there is a consensus now that Kemi has to be a key part of the team of whoever is fortunate enough to win this contest.
Do you think there's been a bit of duplicitous politics involved in all this, Justin? You know, this is the Conservative leadership race after all. What do you make of these suggestions that Rishi Sunak may have been lending some of his MPs to Liz Truss?
I don't think so, because these leadership contests are about momentum, and whilst Rishi is ahead fairly comfortably, he's not over that magic 120 line. He hasn't got the votes to be playing games with, but some MPs may very well have taken their own decision to perhaps move around a little bit to make sure their second choice would be there. But I genuinely don't think there would be anything that orchestrated. It's not like previous leadership contests where there was a clear favourite who perhaps could have had support to move around. This I think it's difficult decisions colleagues have to make. We've had some very good people put themselves forward in the shadow of what was, in my opinion, a unique and very good Prime Minister, and it's difficult for colleagues to work out what is the next way to go, because remember, we will be facing what would be an unprecedented fifth term in office. We own the record of the last 12 years. We need to think carefully as we select someone to be on that front foot and set out the positive reasons why a Conservative government can continue to represent the good people of this country.
And just very finally on that, Justin, I mean, who are you now going to back? Where's your vote going to go tomorrow?
Well, I've looked at my phone. I've never been so popular with colleagues who perhaps have never spoken to me before, suddenly keen to welcome me. I'll be interested who's going to offer me an ice cream. That's the first option if they're going to attract me. But I tell you what, I genuinely don't know. They're all good candidates. Look, they've all got strengths. I've got to think long and hard, because one of them is going to be fortunate enough to get that top job in politics. But I genuinely don't know. I've got a lot of thinking to do.
OK, well, we'll definitely offer you an ice cream if you come back on again, Justin. Thank you very much for your time.
That's very kind.
This afternoon, Justin Thomason there joining us live from Parliament. OK, it's just after 3:30. Coming up next on The Briefing, we're going live to our reporters right around the country to get the latest, of course, on the record-breaking temperatures in the UK today. That record's been smashed this afternoon. We'll have the latest, as I say, with our reporters. But first, let's bring you up to date with the very latest news headlines. It's over to Rosie Wright in the studio.
Good afternoon, it is 3:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Kemi Badenoch is out of the Conservative leadership race. MPs have been voting this afternoon for the new leader of the Tory party in a secret ballot. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak secured the most votes, with support from 118 MPs. The Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt came second with 92 votes, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss secured 86. The next and last ballot among MPs takes place tomorrow, where the candidates will be whittled down to the final two. Then the Conservative Party will choose the next Prime Minister. A grass fire has broken out in Dartford in Kent, with 12 fire engines tackling the blaze. Kent Fire and Rescue Service are warning drivers on the A2 to take extra care, as the smoke is causing reduced visibility. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London says London Fire Brigade have declared a major incident after a surge in fires across the capital. 100 firefighters are currently tackling a large fire which is spread to a residential area in Wellington in Greater London. Well, the UK has recorded temperatures of over 40 degrees for the first time ever. The Met Office say a provisional reading of 40.2 degrees has been measured at Heathrow. Red extreme heat warnings continue for millions of people in England, with amber warnings for most of Britain. A yellow weather warning's been forecasted for Wednesday, with heavy thunderstorms. Last night, temperatures didn't fall below 25 Celsius in places, marking the UK's hottest night on record. A major search operation's underway for a missing swimmer in Essex. The Coast Guard have confirmed 3 swimmers were rescued from the water around Clacton Pier. Emergency services are currently trying to find that 4th swimmer. Wages are falling at the fastest rate since records began, when taking account rising prices. The latest data from the ONS showed paychecks dropped at 3.7% over the 3 months to May when compared against inflation. Meanwhile, the number of workers in the UK on payroll has risen by 31,000 to 29.6 million between May and June. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Very welcome back. It is almost 21 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. God, sometimes you forget what day of the week it is. By the way, we're on TV, online, and of course on your wireless radio. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. What do you think about Kemi Badenoch getting knocked out of the Conservative leadership race? Who would you support among the final three candidates? gbviews@gbnews.uk. And we'll get to those a little later on in the programme. Now, it is the hottest day on record in the UK. I don't know how you could have missed that. Temperatures have already reached 40 degrees Celsius at Heathrow, west of London. They could reach up to 42 degrees elsewhere in the country later on today. Scotland could also see its highest day of record-breaking temperatures. 32.9 degrees set at Craigcrook in the Scottish Borders in August 2003 could fall. The hottest places in Scotland yesterday were in Aberdeenshire, where it reached 31.3 degrees Celsius. Let's get the latest, though, with our reporters right around the country. Will Hollis is in Nottingham and Davy Donaldson is in Fife in Scotland. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Will. What's it like there in Nottingham? Because it is the Midlands, actually, where we may well see the highest temperatures today.
Good afternoon. Yeah, we've moved from Nottingham. We're now in Newark because we knew it was going to be so much hotter, quite similar to those temperatures that we're seeing. I just looked on my phone. It's 40 degrees now in Newark.
You might want to change the time.
Nottinghamshire. Well, of course, lots of people have been staying indoors. It's really quite quiet here in the centre of Newark. It's been a day when we've seen lots of records smashed. 39.2 degrees first in Surrey, and then that was even beaten at Heathrow Airport. Now we're expecting temperatures to continue to rise this afternoon. There's even conversations about thunderstorms later when it might get a little bit cooler. If you are trying to get around today and you haven't already realised, trains are running a massively reduced service on the East Coast Main Line. That's been stopped altogether today. That's from Leeds, York, all the way down to London. You'll probably find it very hard to get into London or even to get out of London today. Rail companies are saying that you can travel another day and you can get a refund. One of the interesting things that we've seen that you wouldn't really expect to see at this point in summer is that gritters are even out on the road spraying sand, because at 33 degrees, tarmac starts to melt. So it is a real big period of firsts and records being broken here in the East Midlands, where you are seeing those red weather warnings right the way down from the top of Yorkshire all the way down to the home counties too.
Well, I have to say, being in parts of central London is quite similar today. Let's go to Fife, though. Davy Donaldson joins us with the Fife Bridge there in the background. What's it like where you are, Davy?
Yeah, I'm actually in South Queen's Ferry. That's the 4th rail bridge behind me. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit overcast. The sun's popping through, touching around about 30 Celsius at the moment. But of course, that has been higher, much higher across other parts of Scotland. The really hottest parts are Dumfries and Galloway. We've seen temperatures of around 32 degrees down there. And in Kelso, I think that record's going to go that you talked about earlier on across Scotland, because I'm hearing temperatures there of somewhere in the region of around 34 degrees. So that's going to beat the previous record of 32.3. I think you said. So yeah, a lot of people coming here to try and get away, not just to the beach here, but to try and get on the water. We've had jet skis in the background. We've had people just to my right here blowing up a dinghy and trying to get out on it. We've seen yachts on the Forth. So yeah, lots of things we've seen as people try and cool down.
Stuff. Even in Fife, it's hot. That's a sign it's really hot. Davy Donaldson, well honest, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And well, of course, we'll have a full weather forecast from the Met Office in just over 10 minutes time. Do stay tuned for that, because it looks like things are going to cool down as of later on this evening. They already are in the southwest, where they've had some rain and thunderstorms this lunchtime. Let's move on, though, and let's talk about Ukraine, because a senior Ukrainian government official has told GB News he is confident that the country will continue to receive full support from the UK, whoever replaces Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. The Deputy Defence Minister says that he's very touched by the high levels of support from all political parties and, importantly, from the British public. He's been speaking to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White.
In Ukraine's second city, this is what months of Russian bombardment does. In Kharkiv's largest residential neighbourhood, there's not a building that hasn't been damaged. Although the main battles are now being waged many miles from here in the Donbass and in the south, this war of attrition is being felt far and wide. But thanks to Western-supplied advanced weapon systems, Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister told me his country's armed forces have largely halted Russian advances. And with more high-tech weaponry, they will, he believes, be able to retake lost territory.
Given the creativity of our commanders, together with technologies we receive from the West, I have no doubts we will crush this old-fashioned Russian army with the old Soviet-type style of offensive, and they have no chances in terms of technologies.
The minister told me his country would be forever grateful for the leadership shown by outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Whoever replaces him, the Ukrainians are confident they'll still have unwavering support from the UK's political leadership and, importantly, from the British people.
We feel that energy every day from ordinary people, from political parties and different organizations in society. So I'm very impressed with the reaction of United Kingdom and Great Britain.
At this training camp in northwest England, the first of at least 10,000 Ukrainian recruits are being put through their paces. The UK's former head of Special Forces says the programme is vital in helping replace Ukrainian combat losses. But those losses are, he says, being felt just as keenly by the Russians.
And to sustain those numbers, eventually they will need to mobilise, or perhaps they'll come up with a form of words as they have done for the war. They will need more men. They're fighting along a 500-mile plus front. That's the distance from here north of Edinburgh. It consumes manpower.
The Deputy Defence Minister says the Ukrainian people are in this fight for the long haul and there will be no surrender of Ukrainian territory to Moscow.
Civil society will never accept any kind of deal related to the loss of our territories. There will be no deal with Russia.
The Ukrainian people will be hoping whoever replaces Boris Johnson that they'll be just as unequivocal in their support for the fight against Russian aggression. Mark White, GB News.
Well, delighted to say Mark White joins me now in the studio. So a real sense, isn't it, from the Ukrainians that, irrespective of what happens with our domestic politics, that there will be continued support from the UK. And we should say that's even irrespective of whether the Conservatives aren't in government. Labour have made a pretty similar case.
Yeah, there's cross-party support for Ukraine in its efforts to try to repel Russia. We, just at the end of last month, had the Prime Minister making a further pledge of £1 billion in extra military spending for Ukraine at the NATO Leaders Summit that was announced. Just today, the European Union have announced that a further €500 million will be going to Ukraine as well in terms of military spending, and that is needed. The Deputy Defence Minister told me that what they really want are the advanced weapon systems, which have arrived in significant numbers in recent months and are really starting to make a difference now. Those howitzer artillery weapons from the US in particular, but also from Australia and Canada. They're accurate, they have a long range, and they are enabling the Ukrainians not just to hold positions, but to start to push back in an offensive in various locations as they aim to try to push Russia back from some key areas that they've gained control of in recent months. And again, with the UK has been supplying 5,000 NLAW anti-tank missiles, also some surface-to-air missile systems, and the Harpoon ship or shore-to-ship missile systems as they are going to be used in that country.
And fascinating, isn't it? I read an article today suggesting, this is clearly not sustainable. I mean, it's clearly not sustainable for both sides, but for the Russians. And when Vladimir Putin realises that, that's potentially, though, when he might be at his most dangerous.
Yeah, Major General Holmes in that report was saying exactly that in terms of just how sustainable or not it is for the Russians. It's 500 miles of territory that they are trying to hold, to push into, and that stretches their lines of supply. And at the same time, they are suffering heavy casualties from the Ukrainians who are being better equipped with every passing week. So it's very difficult for the Russians, but it's also, of course, very difficult for the Ukrainians. They are suffering a heavy toll in terms of lives lost, and it's costing a lot of money, as we say, 2.3 billion already from the UK alone in military spending. Britain says it's in it for the long haul, but as the months tick on,
that becomes more.
It will be interesting to see just what they mean by the long haul.
Mark, as always, thank you very much indeed. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Let's turn back to domestic politics now, because a long-awaited report into bullying and anti-Semitism within the Labour Party has found that two rival camps in the party used accusations of anti-Semitism as a factional weapon to attack each other. Our reporter, Catherine Foster, political reporter, is in the studio. Catherine, talk us through this really extensive and long-awaited report.
Yeah, so 138 pages. It's been long-awaited. It should have been published in April 2020 originally, and it's been delayed. Finally out today, commissioned by Keir Starmer, triggered by the leaked 860-page leaked report into anti-Semitism and bullying back in 2020. What it has found is painful reading, really, for all sides. It says there was toxicity on both sides. It talks of a debilitating inertia, factionalism and infighting, which then distracted from what all profess to be a common cause: electoral success. So rather than actually tackling anti-Semitism, to a large extent what was going on was people that didn't like Jeremy Corbyn were using that as a stick to beat him with, and at the same time people who were supporters of Jeremy Corbyn were basically denying that this was a problem. I have to say there's still some denial going on Twitter now. Jeremy Corbyn is right, is trending, and people will read into this whatever they will, but certainly difficult reading on both sides.
Have we had any reaction from the Labour Party? I mean, what are they going to do about this report, frankly?
Well, we will see, but I would expect that they will adopt the recommendations. It talks of a really dysfunctional party. The disciplinary procedure was not fit for purpose. A Labour spokesman has said that it showed a party that was not in control. But Keir Starmer has taken charge. Keir Starmer is in control. And certainly things have changed dramatically, haven't they? We're not hearing about anti-Semitism now in the way that we did in Jeremy Corbyn's years.
OK, Catherine, as always, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Foster, our political reporter, on the latest on that report, that extensive, long-awaited report into anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Let's turn, finally, back to Ukraine now, but a slightly different topic, because tensions with Moscow and the West continue amid the war in Ukraine, with Russia now already drastically reducing its exports of gas, particularly to Germany, with Berlin now fearing a winter crisis that could grind industry to a halt and leave millions of people freezing in their homes. Could also mean the closure of many big industrial businesses. The leader of the biggest opposition party in Germany has said that the country could be heading for the worst economic crisis since the foundation of the Federal Republic. Well, let's cross over to Thomas Sparrow, German journalist who is based in Berlin and joins us now. Thomas, good afternoon to you. I'm sure it's equally warm there as it is here to a large degree. It means lots of air conditioning. It means that actually energy that could be saved up for the winter is being used, doesn't it? But this is a real fear, not just in Germany, but a large parts of continental Europe, that Russia is slowly but surely turning off that gas supply.
That is certainly a concern here in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe, and that has to do with the very controversial Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which is the main way in which Russia sends gas to Germany and then to other parts of Europe. Now, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline has actually been now for a few days under its yearly regular maintenance. That's something that happens really every year and is not necessarily a matter of concern. But under the current circumstances, German officials do believe that Russia could keep Nord Stream 1 basically off. In other words, that after the 10-day maintenance period, which ends on Thursday, Russia would not turn on the gas again, and that would seriously create problems for Germany, but also for other countries. And let's not forget, just to give you some context, that Germany is heavily dependent on Russian energy. It has indeed reduced that dependency specifically on gas from 55% before the war to 35% now. But if Russia does stop delivering gas to Germany, it basically means that Germany is already starting to scramble to find alternatives to basically supply not only industries, but also households when it comes to the winter months.
And how bad could this get? I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, as some politicians seem to be suggesting, the worst economic crisis since the foundation of the Federal Republic?
Well, some people are certainly concerned that it could cause a recession, that Germany would face a serious economic crisis, that economic output would suffer massively. But this is still something that officials simply still don't know. But if you look at prices, that's something in many people's minds and in many people's concerns. There's an association, for example, representing thousands of homes and households that is saying that people next year would have to budget up to 3,800 euros extra to pay for energy costs. And 3,800 euros is sort of the average monthly salary for a full-time employee here in Germany. So that gives you an idea of how concerned people are about the costs that will be coming. Now, there was a recent poll asking people to evaluate their own economic situation. Most people still said that their private economic situation is good, but when they asked them what the economic situation would look like in a year's time, many indeed said that they think it will be worse. And just to give you an important element here, Germany's economy has always been at the center of Germany's international role. So Germany's power comes ultimately from its economy. If its economy suffers, then Germany's role internationally might also be affected. And that's why, essentially, officials, starting from the Chancellor Olaf Scholz, but also ministers and local politicians as well, are trying to make sure that this whole gas situation and the situation beyond gas as well does not turn into a long-term problem for the country.
Indeed, and potentially for the wider European Union as well. Tom Sparrow, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. OK, that's it from me on the briefing today. Didn't have a time to chat to Colin Brazier, but I think he might be talking about the Conservative leadership race in just a couple of minutes. He's on air from 4 o'clock. Oh, and he's going to be talking about the weather, he tells me, as well. I'll be back, of course, at 3 tomorrow. We're going to find out in our programme who is going to be in the final 2 of that leadership race with a big vote in Parliament. But for me, for now, I'll leave you with the weather from the Met Office, and it's hot, but it's going to get cooler. I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Extraordinary temperatures today, with the UK seeing highs over 40 Celsius for the first time on record. It is turning cooler, you may be pleased to hear, with much fresher air arriving from the west, along with some showers. We're already seeing that happen in the southwest, across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. A couple of cold fronts making their way in from the west. They will displace the heat over the next 24 hours. They will bring some showers into the Midlands, eastern England during the evening. Some welcome relief, I think, from the excessively high temperatures during the afternoon. And then overnight, well, that fresher air arrives, but still a fairly muggy night. 18 in Cardiff, 20 in London, 14 for Belfast and Glasgow. And it's a fine start, actually, for eastern and central parts of the country. Some sunshine first thing. Thicker cloud for Wales, the southwest, Northern Ireland, as well as parts of Scotland, with a few showers around. Now, the temperatures will rise through the day, nowhere near as high as we've seen during Tuesday, but enough to bring the risk of showers or thunderstorms to central and southeastern parts of the country. Perhaps some very lively downpours. 28 Celsius in London, 30 possible for eastern England, but a fresher low to mid-20s for western areas and high teens, low 20s for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Any showers or thunderstorms clear through during Wednesday evening, and then overnight clear spells once again. And by this time, it really will be a fresher night, with temperatures in the south, 15 or 16 Celsius, 12 or 13 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Then some low cloud to begin things on Thursday across eastern and central England. A few spots of rain out of this. Some showers for the northwest of Scotland as well, but the cloud in the east will tend to lift. And Thursday's looking like a mostly dry day with some sunny spells and temperatures closer to average. Showers on Friday and a few